Welcome to She's Got This, the podcast for ambitious women who want to grow and scale their business and use the power of intentional energy direction to design their very best life. I'm your host, Christine Gallagher, award-winning business coach and mindset mentor to female entrepreneurs. If you're ready to own your brilliance while making bank, step into the absolute best version of you, and become a force for positive change in the world, you're in the right place. Let's do it. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. It's Christine Gallagher. Today, I wanted to talk to you about the law of assumption versus the law of attraction. So you may remember that the movie The Secret came out almost 15 plus years ago now. And when it did, the law of attraction became really popular. It went mainstream. And in my opinion, that movie didn't really tell the whole story. It left out a lot of context. And I think it led to a lot of people being sort of disappointed in the concept and believing like, oh, this is all just a fantasy. This isn't real. This doesn't work. So that movie, in my opinion, while it brought things more into the mainstream, it kind of oversimplified things. And it made it seem that if you want to create what it is that you want, you just think about it and then boom, you have it. And it's not that the law of attraction isn't real. The law of attraction is real. But for me, the more important and relevant law is the law of assumption. So here's the difference between the two. The law of attraction is based on the belief that positive thoughts bring positive experiences into your life and negative thoughts bring negative experiences into your life. Meanwhile, the law of assumption is a concept that involves manifesting what you want by believing that you already have the thing that you want. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. So there are a few things that people seem to overlook when they talk about the law of attraction, and it's why I don't really study it so much anymore or put my attention there. First, if you have not dealt with your past traumas and healed from them, they remain in your body. And really, when you're manifesting, it's going to be really hard to overcome that because our traumas and our experiences directly influence our beliefs. And they also can dysregulate our nervous system. So I believe that healing is a big key to all of this, and that doesn't get talked about a lot. And personally, for myself, I've done a lot of healing in recent years. I've talked about this on the podcast before. I've used things like EMDR and energy healing because in my experience, these are really effective. They go beyond talk-based cognitive therapy, which really often just reaches the surface level. But those aren't the only options out there. There are many different ways to deal with your stuff and change your beliefs and deal with your trauma and release that trauma. Breath work and meditation are other options. And it's really just a matter of finding which one works for you and which one you like best. But whether we're talking about the law of attraction or we're talking about the law of assumption, it's really tough to stay in a place of faith, honestly, and stay in a place of belief when you are spiraling emotionally and haven't dealt with your stuff. So that's why I believe that regulating your nervous system and releasing trauma so that you can shift your beliefs about yourself are really a vital part of all of this. Because when you are no longer sitting in the pain of the fear, the doubts, the trauma, you will have a much easier time creating what it is that you want. So when you release and heal those things that you've been carrying around, you actually start to trigger the magic that has always been inside of you. So you are your most important mission. And that's why I always believe that when you spend time turning inwards, that time is never wasted. And listen, if you really believe in the law of assumption, can you assume, hey, I don't have trauma to deal with and there is nothing in my way and I'm just going to use this law of assumption to create what I want? Absolutely. And I ask people to try that if they want to. But in my experience with myself and with people I've worked with, it's definitely a lot easier when you are honest about some of the things that you may need to still work through that are making it hard for you to shift those beliefs. The second thing to know is that you don't attract what you want, actually. You attract what you believe. And it's not actually about attracting anything from outside of you. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. But the fact is that you can't receive anything you don't believe you can have. And that's why your self-concept is so important. It's why I talk about it so much, because your concept of yourself creates all the circumstances in your life, and any change that you want to see occur, it needs to start from within you. That's where it starts first. And you then call everyone and everything into your world according to what it is that you believe. And you get to choose what you believe, and you get to choose what you become. What happened to you isn't your final destination. We've all had things happen to us and things that we've gone through. But once you change how you see yourself and commit to that new self-concept, the world has no other choice but to start rearranging itself around you. So I mentioned this a second ago, but there's a misconception about attracting what you want. You don't attract what it is that you want. You literally create what you want from who you are being. It comes from you, not anything outside of you. So to receive what you want, it's really about shifting your identity and how you see yourself. And I talk to my clients all the time about how to best do this. And I've talked about this in other episodes as well. The third thing that's misunderstood is that it's just about thinking or even just repeating affirmations. That's a very simplified way to look at it. Those types of things can be really helpful if they help shift how you see yourself. I personally use affirmations all the time, but what it's really about is believing that it is already done. So it's about persisting in the wish fulfilled. So just mindlessly reading affirmations without really feeling them, without really feeling that you're integrating that new belief, isn't usually going to do much for you. So the desire that you envision in your mind as having already happened by living in the end can't help but come to fruition from that place. So in order to influence your subconscious to live in the state that you actually want to be in, you have to assume the feeling that you would have if your wish was already fulfilled. So the end goal is what matters most here. How it shows up or what kind of obstacles might get in the way is not your concern. So for me, it feels like a knowing. And then your higher self actually determines the means. And there are a lot of techniques out there for getting yourself into the state of having what it is that you want. I've talked about this before. One of my favorite techniques is something called SATS, which stands for state akin to sleep. And that is a way to get you into the state of having what it is that you want. And what's really important here is getting into that state. And I'm going to share some examples of this in a little bit so it's clear what that actually means. So the law of assumption is so important to understand, in my opinion, because most of us have been under the illusion that there are causes other than our own state of consciousness. But everything we do and everything that comes from us is a result of our consciousness, meaning what we believe, what we accept, what we desire, and what we agree to. Before we change our outer world, our inner world needs to change. So how does that exactly happen? So first, with any change, it needs to start with desire, the desire to be, do, or have something different. So when you know you want things to be different, you can assume you already are that different person. When you persist in that assumption until it feels natural, that's a very big part of this, feeling natural, and it's your dominant feeling, your future dream becomes a present fact. So there's a difference between knowing something because you see it from the outside, you're able to compare it with different things, you're able to think about it, and actually becoming something. So being the thing is different than just talking about it or looking at it. You must be conscious of being wealthy if you want to know what wealth is. You must be conscious of being loved if you want to know what love is. You must be conscious of being successful if you want to know what success is. So when you assume that you already are what you want to be, and then you live by faith in that assumption, you create a new version of yourself. And the instrument by which you create is your human imagination. Your imagination is actually the God in you. God is not something outside of you. But us humans look around and we think change occurs because of coincidence or outer causes or by chance. But what's really governing us is our own assumptions. Neville Goddard said, an assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. And we actually live by the law of assumption every day in our lives, but we live by it unconsciously. And our life gets created in a way where we are not using it intentionally. We create our destiny every moment, whether we know it or not. But when we master it by consciously controlling our imagination, we set ourselves free. So when you put your attention on what you desire, What you're doing is putting your attention on one state versus another and crowding out all of the other ideas. So a single assumption leads to a bridge of incidents unfolding, which then leads to a result. Now, most of us exercise very little control over our imagination and think that we need to drift through life at the whim of our moods or outside circumstances. But when we realize we have control over directing our attention, meaning concentrating our attention on things as you would like them to be instead of as they are, life changes completely. Your assumption places you in your mind where you are not currently in your physical body, and your senses pull you from where you are psychologically to where you are physically. So to understand this, we need to understand that creation is finished and everything exists. Now, I've talked about this before on other episodes, but creation is finished means whatever you want to experience is here ready for you to experience it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had that desire in the first place. It exists in another reality. Nothing is ever to be created, truly. It is only to be manifested. All possibilities exist, and that's because time is not linear. We think of time as being linear because that's a way that us humans understand time and need to make things make sense. But the past, the present, and the future are actually all happening at once. So that means you can decide to align with the possible outcome you most want. So the version of your life where you have everything you desire is already existing. You may not see it now because you can only see what is present in your consciousness. When you begin to embody the state of already having what you want, you can then align with that version and allow that in. And as soon as you transform yourself, what happens is your world starts to rearrange itself to reflect what your change is actually affirming. So what your assumption does is call back the view that you don't see and restore your full vision of it. So your assumptions determine what portion of creation you are actually experiencing. So by changing your concept of yourself, you can interfere with your future and then you mold it to align with that change concept of self. So sometimes people wonder when we talk about this idea of creation is finished, okay, does this ability to change the future go against this idea that creation is finished? No, because by changing your concept of yourself, you change your relationship to things. So if you rearrange the words of a play to write a different play, you haven't created new words, you've rearranged them. So your self-concept determines the order of the events that you actually encounter. They are in the foundation of the world, but not their order of arrangement. So your imagination takes consciousness, which is the one and only substance, and forms it into concepts. So concepts then become manifested as conditions and physical objects and circumstances. So your imagination is creating your world. And for me, it's been helpful to remind myself not to put so much focus on what's going on externally and to concentrate more on the thoughts and the moods that I determine deliberately. So when I do that, I find that the things that are restricting me start to fade away. So the keys are knowing your desire, using your imagination, and focusing your attention on the assumption that your wish has already been fulfilled. And a lot of this is about persistence. So Neville said, when it appears that people other than yourself in your world do not act toward you as you would like, it is not due to reluctance on their part, but a lack of persistence in your assumption of your life already being as you want it to be. And I want to share a couple of examples of this being illustrated from Neville's book, The Power of Awareness. So he said, this is the story of a very unexpected result of an interview with a lady who came to consult me. One afternoon, a young grandmother, a businesswoman in New York, came to see me. She brought along her 9-year-old grandson who was visiting from his home in Pennsylvania. In response to her questions, I explained the law of assumption, describing in detail the procedure to be followed in attaining an objective. The boy sat quietly, apparently absorbed in a small toy truck, while I explained to the grandmother the method of assuming the state of consciousness that would be hers were her desire already fulfilled. I told her the story of the soldier in camp who each night fell asleep, imagining himself to be in his own bed in his own home. When the boy and his grandmother were leaving, he looked up at me with great excitement and said, I know what I want, and now I know how to get it. Surprised, I asked him what it was he wanted. He told me he had his heart set on a puppy. To this, the grandmother vigorously protested, telling the boy that it had been made clear repeatedly that he could not have a dog under any circumstances, that his father and mother would not allow it, that the boy was too young to care for it properly, and furthermore, the father had a deep dislike for dogs. He actually hated to have one around. All these were arguments the boy, passionately desirous of having a dog, refused to understand. Now I know what to do, he said. Every night, just as I'm going off to sleep, I'm going to pretend that I have a dog and we are going for a walk. No, said the grandmother, that is not what Mr. Neville means. This was not meant for you. You cannot have a dog. Approximately 6 weeks later, the grandmother told me what was to her an astonishing story. The boy's desire to own a dog was so intense that he had absorbed all that I had told his grandmother of how to attain one's desire, and he believed implicitly that at last he knew how to get a dog. Putting this belief into practice, for many nights the boy imagined a dog was lying in his bed beside him. In imagination, he petted the dog, actually feeling its fur. Things like playing with the dog and taking it for a walk filled his mind. Within a few weeks, it happened. A newspaper in the city in which the boy lived organized a special program in connection with Kindness to Animals Week. All school children were requested to write an essay on why I would like to own a dog. After entries from all the schools were submitted and judged, the winner of the contest was announced. The very same boy who weeks before in my apartment in New York had told me, now I know how to get a dog, was the winner. In an elaborate ceremony, which was publicized with stories and pictures in the newspaper, the boy was awarded a beautiful collie puppy. In relating this story, the grandmother told me that if the boy had been given the money with which to buy a dog, the parents would have refused to do so and would have used it to buy a bond for the boy or put it in the savings bank for him. Furthermore, if someone had made the boy a gift of a dog, they would have refused it or given it away. But the dramatic manner in which the boy got the dog, the way he won the citywide contest, the stories and pictures in the newspaper, the pride of achievement and joy of the boy himself all combined to bring about a change of heart in the parents, and they found themselves doing that which they never conceived possible. They allowed him to keep the dog. All this the grandmother explained to me, and she concluded by saying that there was one particular kind of dog on which the boy had set his heart. It was a collie. Here's another story he tells, which illustrates the law of assumption. This was told by the aunt in the story to the entire audience at the conclusion of one of my lectures. During the question period following my lecture on the law of assumption, a lady who had attended many lectures and had had personal consultation with me on a number of occasions rose and asked permission to tell a story illustrating how she had successfully used the law. She said that upon returning home from the lecture the week before, she had found her niece distressed and terribly upset. The husband of the niece, who was an officer in the Army Air Force stationed in Atlantic City, had just been ordered, along with the rest of his unit, to active duty in Europe. She tearfully told her aunt that the reason she was upset was that she had been hoping her husband would be assigned to Florida as an instructor. They both loved Florida and were anxious to be stationed there and not to be separated. Upon hearing this story, the aunt stated that there was only one thing to do, and that was to apply immediately the law of assumption. Let's actualize it, she said. If you were actually in Florida, what would you do? You would feel the warm breeze, you would smell the salt air, you would feel your toes sinking down into the sand. Well, let's do all of that right now. They took off their shoes and turning out the lights, in imagination, they felt themselves actually in Florida, feeling the warm breeze, smelling the sea air, pushing their toes into the sand. 48 hours later, the husband received a change of orders. His new instructions were to report immediately to Florida as an Air Force instructor. 5 days later, his wife was on a train to join him, while the aunt, in order to help her niece attain her desire, joined in with the niece in assuming the state of consciousness required. She did not go to Florida. That was not her desire. On the other hand, that was the intense longing of the niece. I want to share a couple of other examples to really drive this home. This story illustrates the successful use of the law by a New York business executive. An executive of one of New York's prominent banks discussed with me a serious problem with which he was confronted. He told me that the outlook for his personal progress and advancement was very dim. Having reached middle age and feeling that a market improvement in position and income was justified, he had talked it out with his superiors. They frankly told him that any major improvement was impossible and intimated that if he was dissatisfied, he could seek another job. This, of course, only increased his uneasiness. In our talk, he explained that he had no great desire for really big money, but that he had to have a substantial income in order to maintain his home comfortably and to provide for the education of his children in good prep schools and colleges. This he found impossible on his present income. The refusal of the bank to assure him of any advancement in the near future resulted in a feeling of discontent and an intense desire to secure a better position with considerably more money. He confided in me that the kind of job he would like better than anything in the world was one in which he managed the investment funds of a large institution such as a foundation or a great university. In explaining the law of assumption, I stated that his present situation was only a manifestation of his concept of himself and declared that if he wanted to change the circumstances in which he found himself, he could do so by changing his concept of himself. In order to bring about this change of consciousness and thereby a change in his situation, I asked him to follow this procedure every night just before he fell asleep. In imagination, he was to feel he was retiring at the end of one of the most important and successful days of his life. He was to imagine that he had actually closed a deal that very day to join the kind of organization he yearned to be with and in exactly the capacity he wanted. I suggested to him that if he succeeded in completely filling his mind with this feeling, he would experience a definite sense of relief. In this mood, his uneasiness and discontent would be a thing of the past. He would feel the contentment that comes with the fulfillment of desire. I wound up by assuring him that if he did this faithfully, he would inevitably get the kind of position he wanted. This was the first week of December. Night after night, without exception, he followed this procedure. Early in February, a director of one of the wealthiest foundations in the world asked this executive if he would be interested in joining the foundation in an executive capacity handling investments. After some brief discussion, he accepted. Today, at a substantially higher income and with the assurance of steady progress, this man is in a position far exceeding all that he had hoped for. Okay, so let me share one last example with you. The man and wife in this story have attended my lectures for a number of years. It is an interesting illustration of the conscious use of this law by two people concentrating on the same objective at one time. For some time, this couple had planned to move into a larger apartment. The more they thought about it, the more they realized that what they had their hearts set on was a beautiful penthouse. In discussing it together, the husband explained that he wanted one with a huge window looking out on a magnificent view. The wife said she would like to have one side of the walls mirrored from top to bottom. They both wanted to have a wood-burning fireplace. It was a must that the apartment be in New York City. For months, they had searched for just an apartment in vain. In fact, the situation in the city was such that the securing of any kind of apartment was almost an impossibility. They were so scarce that not only were there waiting lists for them, but all sorts of special deals, including premiums, the buying of furniture, etc., were involved. New apartments were being leased long before they were completed, many being rented from the blueprints of the building. Early in the spring, after months of fruitless seeking, they finally located one which they seriously considered. It was a penthouse apartment in a building just being completed on Upper Fifth Avenue facing Central Park. It had one serious drawback. Being a new building, it was not subject to rent control, and the couple felt the yearly rental was exorbitant. In fact, it was several $1,000s a year more than they had considered paying. During the spring months of March and April, they continued looking at various penthouses throughout the city, but they always came back to this one. Finally, they decided to increase the amount they would pay substantially and made a proposition with the agent for the building agreed to forward to the owners for consideration. It was at this point, without discussing it with each other, each determined to apply the law of assumption. It was not until later that each learned what the other had done. Night after night, they both fell asleep in imagination in the apartment they were considering. The husband, lying with his eyes closed, would imagine that his bedroom windows were overlooking the park. He would imagine going to the window the first thing in the morning and enjoying the view. He felt himself sitting on the terrace overlooking the park, having cocktails with his wife and friends, all thoroughly enjoying it. He filled his mind with actually feeling himself in the penthouse and on the terrace. During all this time, unknown to him, his wife was doing the same thing. Several weeks went by without any decision on the part of the owners, but they continued to imagine as they fell asleep each night that they were actually sleeping in the penthouse. One day, to their complete surprise, one of the employees in the apartment building in which they lived told them that the penthouse there was vacant. They were astonished because theirs was one of the most desirable buildings in the city with a perfect location right on Central Park. They knew there was a long waiting list of people trying to get an apartment in their building. The fact that a penthouse had unexpectedly become available was kept quiet by the management because they were not in a position to consider any applicants for it. Upon learning that it was vacant, this couple immediately made a request that it be rented to them, only to be told that this was impossible. The fact was that not only were there several people on a waiting list for a penthouse in the building, but it was actually promised to one family. Despite this, the couple had a series of meetings with the management, at the conclusion of which the apartment was theirs. The building being subject to rent control, their rental was just about what they had planned to pay when they first started looking for a penthouse. The location, the apartment itself, and the large terrace surrounding it on the southwest and north was beyond all their expectations. And in the living room on one side is a giant window of 15 feet by 8 feet with a magnificent view of Central Park. One wall is mirrored from floor to ceiling, and there is a wood-burning fireplace. Now, Neville also talks about failure and what it means. So he says, if having read this book, having a thorough knowledge of the application and working of the law of assumption, you faithfully applied in an effort to attain some intense desire and fail, what is the reason? If to the question, did you persist enough, you can answer yes, and still the attainment of your desire was not realized, what is the reason for failure? The answer to this is the most important factor in the successful use of the law of assumption. The time it takes your assumption to become fact, your desire to be fulfilled, is directly proportionate to the naturalness of your feeling of already being what you want to be, of already having what you desire. The fact that it does not feel natural to you to be what you imagine yourself to be is the secret of your failure. Regardless of your desire, regardless of how faithfully and intelligently you follow the law, if you do not feel natural about what you want to be, you will not be it. If it does not feel natural to you to get a better job, you will not get a better job. How can this feeling of naturalness be achieved? The secret lies in one word: imagination. He also talks about faith. If there were not a deep-seated awareness, he says, that which you hoped for had substance and was possible of attainment, it would be impossible to assume the consciousness of being or having it. It is the fact that creation is finished and everything exists that stirs you to hope, and hope in turn implies expectation. And without expectation of success, it would be impossible to use consciously the law of assumption. Evidence is a sign of actuality. Consequently, it is obvious that a lack of faith means disbelief in the existence of that which you desire. Contrary to popular opinion, the efficacy of faith is not due to the work of any outside agency. It is from first to last an activity of your own consciousness. So what it comes down to is that you are the creator. This is the great, quote, secret, unquote, known by the prophets, the seers, and the mystics throughout the ages. So when you become aware of this, you become aware of the greatest power that you will ever know. And don't just take my word for it, test it and see.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could leave me a review on iTunes or share it with someone else who would find it helpful. To stay connected with me, please visit shesgotclients.com and sign up for my email list at the bottom of the page. Or feel free to share this episode on your Instagram and tag me at Christine G, and I'll repost you. I would love to share this with as many people as possible. I love you. Until next time, keep shining your light.